Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here to kick off Tesla's Q4 earnings week. I will be doing my earnings preview episode tomorrow, probably live. I'm still waiting on the company compiled estimate, so I want to have that as a benchmark for us to compare to. And we've also got plenty of other news to catch up on today, so we'll do that and then keep an eye out for the earnings episode, probably live tomorrow afternoon. For today, we'll talk a little bit about the stock. We have quite a bit of news also relevant to Tesla from the US government, an updated analyst price target, a couple of interesting tweets from Elon. We also have some news on Tesla and Samsung, updated words from Sandy Munro on 2021 Model 3s, and a couple other product things to look at. So like I said, a lot to go through. We'll start off here with the stock. Tesla today hit both a new all-time high and a new all-time high close, just barely there at the end, finishing at $880.80, up 4%. That compared to the NASDAQ, up 0.69%. We'll keep the extra significant digit this time, but as far as Tesla's all-time high, it did cross briefly today the $900 per share mark, which pre-split would have been $4,500 per share. Much of the attention around Tesla stock over the weekend and for today was focused on Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, disclosing that she had acquired a $500,000 to $1 million position in Tesla call options back in December. Technically, it wasn't actually Nancy Pelosi, but rather her husband, as we can see by the SP indicator for spouse under owner on the disclosure paperwork. Obviously, it doesn't make too much of a difference, but her husband does run a venture capital / real estate / consulting firm, so it's a little bit less unusual. Anyway, the trade was for 25 contracts, a $500 strike for March of 2022. That grants the right for the Pelosi's to buy 2,500 shares of Tesla for $500 per share up through March of 2022, and they would pay some premium for that option. Tesla stock is up about 37% since they would have acquired these contracts, and at the midpoint of the last bid and ask today, these would trade at about $45,600 per contract, so a little over a $1.1 million position today. So certainly they'd be up on the trade if they do still have the position. I do find it a little bit odd that members of Congress or households of members of Congress can trade stock options, but I suppose that is a separate conversation. Anyway, the market could react to this as seeing this as a positive in terms of possible legislation. Of course, with the Biden administration coming in, that's already a theme on people's minds, but that theme gets more attention with news like this. Speaking of the Biden administration, Reuters has reported that, quote, a memo seen by Reuters on Thursday showed Biden will unveil a second round of executive orders as soon as January 27th that include an omnibus order to combat climate change domestically and elevate the issue as a national security priority, end quote. So as soon as January 27th, if that ends up being the date, that is of course also the date of Tesla's Q4 earnings report. Biden today also announced that the United States intends to move in the direction of electric vehicles for the U.S. government vehicle fleet, saying, quote, the federal government also owns an enormous fleet of vehicles which we're going to replace with clean electric vehicles made right here in America by American workers, end quote. Of course, the implementation and execution of this remains to be seen. The federal government operates right around 645,000 vehicles, and they actually have quite a bit of data about this available online. There's a dashboard available that breaks that fleet down by segment, by department, looks at fuel costs, total cost, miles driven, a lot of data there. And of that 645,000 vehicle fleet, about 2/3 of that is trucks, primarily light and medium duty. Across the entire fleet, it looks like they spend about $2 billion per year on the combination of maintenance and fuel. So definitely some opportunity for savings there by introducing electric vehicles. What I'm having trouble figuring out is the budget for new vehicles. I'm not sure how that makes its way into their cost breakdowns here. And I think we'd need to have a better understanding of that to understand Tesla's specific opportunity in this segment. But regardless, I think we can all agree how awesome it would be to see some Cybertrucks at least represented in some way in the US government fleet. The total opportunity, though, is probably better for other automakers than it is for Tesla. I think Tesla's probably less likely to negotiate a contract with the US government, and being that Tesla has a premium brand image, I think it would be a more difficult sell for the US to buy a bunch of Tesla vehicles versus buying something like a bunch of Ford vehicles, for example. I'd also expect a degree of unionization to play a role in those decisions. All right, last quick thing here to wrap up on the stock. We did see a price target increase today from Baird. They have increased their Tesla price target from $488 per share now to $728 per share. And it looks like they have maintained an outperform rating on the stock, even though they did have that price target that was about half of the share price today. And the $728 new price target is still, 15% below where we're at. The revised price target was as a result of Baird boosting their earnings per share forecast for the next 3 years. For 2021, in terms of vehicle deliveries, they're now expecting 856,000. For 2022, about 1.2 million, and 23, just under 1.6 million. Baird titled this note as a Q4 preview and then put ... and one more thing. That one more thing referred to some points that they were making on a sort of company X holding company for Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and the Boring Company. Of course, we've talked about this a lot, so nothing really new here, but it was interesting to see it show up in an analyst note, and they did say that, quote, several data points leave us believing such a structure is inevitable, end quote. So it'll be interesting to see how that storyline develops this year. Quick note on SpaceX while we're talking about it, they did successfully complete their mission over the weekend, and as far as Starship SN9, still no test flight there, but it looks like it may happen early tomorrow. Next here, let's move over to Elon's Twitter, a couple of interesting tweets over the last few days. So the first here is on autopilot. Elon, in a reply to an FSD video from Holmar's catalog, said that, quote, Tesla is steadily moving all neural networks to 8-camera surround video. This will enable superhuman self-driving, end quote. So of course, this is part of the autopilot core rewrite that we've been talking about. I think Omar had a similar response that many of us would have had, saying, oh, I didn't realize that some networks still weren't running on surround video. It's already so good I assume the transition was complete. To which Elon said, quote, the entire quote-unquote stack, from data collection through labeling and inference, has to be in surround video. This is a hard problem. Critically, however, this does not require a hardware change to cars in field, end quote. Hopefully we get to hear more about Tesla's status and progress here on the Q4 earnings call. We do have that question on Say that looks like it will get asked about why Elon is so confident in achieving level 5 autonomy this year, and why Dojo isn't necessary to get there. So that should be a good opportunity. Also on autonomy, of course, last week we talked about Waymo and their comments that seem to be directed towards Tesla. Elon yesterday fired back a little bit, saying that, quote, to my surprise, Tesla has better AI hardware and software than Waymo, parentheses, money, end quote. If you're confused about that last bit, likely just a pun on the word Waymo. Waymo obviously has had much more funding available to them than Tesla has, hence way more money. Saying that historically, obviously that situation has now changed with Tesla's market cap. Next today we have a report out of South Korea from asiae.co.kr on Tesla and Samsung potentially working together to develop a new 5nm semiconductor for vehicular use that will, quote, become the core of fully autonomous vehicles, end quote. Now that would obviously point to a hardware 4 or a second iteration on Tesla's full self-driving hardware chip, but it's not quite that clear cut. We had previously had reports that Tesla was planning to work with TSMC on that. Later on, the article states, quote, the area that the two companies are expanding cooperation this time is the infotainment product using 5nm semiconductors, end quote. I'll leave further speculation to that for the comment section. I'm sure we'll have some good thoughts there, but even if this were hardware 4, that of course should be expected from Tesla at some point, as we have talked about. Even back to the full self-driving hardware 3 unveiling, Tesla talked about how they would likely have in a couple of years a new chip with the obvious improvements. That step alone does not mean that Tesla would be incapable of completing what they're trying to do with hardware 3. And if they needed to eventually end up swapping out those chips, we've obviously seen them do that from hardware 2.5 to 3. That's an easy process for Tesla to complete. Last few things here are product related. We'll start off with the 2021 Model 3. We've of course talked about Sandy Munro's previous comments on the Model 3 that they were looking at, which of course had some panel gaps. We've been talking a lot about that over the last couple of weeks. So Munro actually came across another Model 3 2021 on his sort of road trip, and that provided us a perfect example of not extrapolating too much from one car, because he said this Model 3 was perfect. About this Model 3, he said, quote, I gotta say, his Model 3 had perfect gaps on the right side, perfect gaps on the left side, spectacular paint job, end quote. Adding, quote, I was very impressed. That car was as good as anything you could find out of anything in Europe, end quote. So this example works both ways. If Munro had actually received that car instead, which could have just as easily happened, he would have been raving about the improvements that Tesla has made over the years, while at the same time then, somebody else would have received the Model 3 that Munro did with some pretty visible issues. So it's just a case in point of not taking too much either way from just one individual car like that, other than it gives us examples that Tesla is both capable of delivering really, really well-made cars, and some that leave something to be desired. Flipping over to the Model Y, we have another really nice shot here. This one's even a bit clearer than the one we had previously looked at of the Model Y rear underbody casting. This was shared by Kelvin Yang on Twitter via another source. I just thought that was a really nice image, so wanted to pass that along. And then lastly today, of course, as we head into earnings, all of us are waiting anxiously to find out if we're going to hear anything on a potential Model S and X refresh. Over the last couple of days, Teslarati and others have shared some photos of what seems to be somewhat updated or at least a non-standard Model S driving around. I don't want to spend too much time focusing on it. It could just be a test mule. This may look nothing like what we end up seeing, if we end up even seeing exterior changes at all. But to me, it looks pretty similar to that blue Model S that I think the Kilowatts channel had spotted driving around with dealer plates a few weeks back. At the least, we can see that it does have black trim, and it looks like it has those sort of matte black arachnid style wheels. Anyway, if you did happen to miss that article's over at Teslarati, but that will wrap it up for today. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure to be subscribed and sign up for notifications so you know when I go live tomorrow. Also provide an update on that on Twitter at Tesla Podcast, and I'll see you then. Thank you.